In the small town of Cedar Hollow, where secrets are buried just as deep as the roots of its ancient trees, one man's jealousy and obsession led to an unimaginable tragedy. David Moore had it all: a loving wife, a home in the perfect neighborhood, and a flawless life. But beneath the surface, things were far from perfect. His decades-long friendship with Brad Turner, a man he trusted like family, was about to unravel in the most tragic way possible. Fueled by suspicion and uncontrollable rage, David's dark side would soon emerge, setting the stage for a crime that would rock the town to its core. In today's video, we dive deep into the twisted tale of betrayal, obsession, and a crime that nobody saw coming. Stay tuned to find out what happened and how the truth was finally exposed. It was a calm afternoon on May 7th, 2017, in the quiet town of Bel Air, Ohio, when David Kinney, his wife Sherry, and their young daughter set out to visit David's close friend, Brad McGarry. Their plan was straightforward: return a weed trimmer Brad had lent them. As they arrived at Brad's house, something felt off. Despite his car being parked outside, there was no response to their knocks at the front door. Concern grew as the minutes ticked by. The family circled to the back of the house and found the service door slightly open, a small but unsettling detail that heightened their unease. Deciding to investigate, David cautiously stepped inside, while Sherry and their daughter stayed behind, their apprehension mounting. The interior of the home was in complete disarray. Furniture was overturned, drawers were pulled out, and belongings were scattered across the floors. It looked as if the house had been ransacked, but there were no immediate signs of Brad. Sherry, feeling the tension rise, called out his name, her voice trembling. The only response was an eerie silence that hung heavy in the air. Determined to find answers, David ventured further into the house. His search led him to the basement, where his worst fears were realized. There, lying face down on the cold, hard floor, was Brad's lifeless body in a pool of blood. The sight was harrowing. Brad had clearly been the victim of violence. Overcome with shock, David let out a scream that echoed through the house, drawing Sherry downstairs. She froze at the foot of the stairs as her eyes met the gruesome scene. Stifling her panic, Sherry grabbed her phone and called 911, her hands shaking as she relayed the horrifying discovery to the operator. When the police arrived, they found David and Sherry visibly shaken and struggling to process the tragedy. Through tears, they explained their close relationship with Brad, detailing how he was more than a friend, he was part of their family. The Kinney children affectionately called him Uncle Brad, and he had been a constant presence in their lives, often joining them for holidays and family gatherings. The couple even shared plans to travel to the Bahamas with Brad later that year, underscoring the deep bond they shared. During questioning, David and Sherry mentioned that Brad had recently ended a tumultuous relationship with a man named Scotty, though they couldn't recall his last name. They described the relationship as fraught with arguments and tension, possibly hinting at a motive for violence. As investigators began combing through the scene, they noticed more troubling details. The basement was stark and grim, with Brad's body lying in a pool of blood. At first glance, it appeared he had been shot in the head. Initially, the police entertained the possibility of suicide, but as they examined the scene more closely, their theory unraveled. No weapon was found near the body, a crucial detail that ruled out the idea of self-inflicted harm. The rest of the house seemed to have been ransacked in a peculiar manner, raising questions about whether this was a robbery gone wrong or something far more personal. The investigators worked meticulously to piece together the events leading to Brad's untimely death, determined to uncover the truth hidden within the chaos of that tragic afternoon. The kitchen was a scene of chaos, with drawers yanked open and their contents scattered, while the living room was similarly in disarray. Initially, investigators suspected Brad's death might have been the result of a robbery gone awry. However, after a closer examination, it became evident that nothing valuable had been taken, despite the presence of numerous items worth stealing. Brad's home, filled with his collection of rural-style art and other valuable possessions, seemed untouched by a thief's hands. Oddly, the television remained in place, and loose cash was found strewn across the floor. These inconsistencies led detectives to conclude that the scene had been deliberately staged to mislead them. As they dug deeper, the investigators considered alternate motives. Brad was openly gay and worked in a coal mine, a traditionally conservative environment. This raised the possibility of a hate crime committed by someone from his workplace. However, interviews with his colleagues painted a very different picture. Brad was universally respected and admired, and described as a kind and dependable man. With this theory ruled out, the detectives turned their focus to his personal relationships. Brad's friend Wendy confirmed the relationship with Scotty, expressing relief as she had opposed the relationship. According to Wendy, Scotty's influence had brought turmoil to Brad's life, creating strange and unsettling dynamics. Following this lead, detectives tracked Scotty down, only to learn from his mother that he had been incarcerated for probation violations for the past 3 months. While this ruled him out as the direct perpetrator, they theorized he might have orchestrated the crime from jail with an accomplice's help. When detectives visited Scotty in prison to inform him of Brad's death, his reaction appeared genuine. Shaken by the news, Scotty denied any involvement. While this seemed to eliminate him as a suspect, the detectives continued to explore other avenues. They canvassed the neighborhood, searching for security footage, and struck gold when a nearby resident's camera revealed activity near Brad's home. Meanwhile, further interviews uncovered a significant lead. Brad's cousin shared that on the day of the murder, Brad had mentioned expecting a visit from a man named DJ. The cousin revealed that DJ was a married man with whom Brad had maintained a long-standing, secret relationship. Reluctantly, she disclosed DJ's real identity, David, the very man who had discovered Brad's body. This revelation shifted the investigation dramatically, as David transitioned from witness to prime suspect. Detectives obtained David's phone under the pretext of retrieving crime scene photos, but used it to analyze his location data. Forensic analysis revealed that David's phone had been at Brad's house during the time of the murder. Despite his attempts to delete incriminating messages, recovered texts confirmed a romantic relationship with Brad. Additionally, surveillance footage showed David arriving at Brad's house in his wife's car just before the estimated time of the attack, and later returning in his truck with his family under the guise of delivering a weed trimmer. Confronted with mounting evidence, David initially denied involvement, but soon changed his story multiple times, offering contradictory versions of events. However, the detective made it clear that he didn't believe this story, prompting David to alter his account once again. When pressed to tell the truth, David eventually confessed to hiding his affair from his wife, Sherry, but insisted that it had only been going on for a few months, not years. He claimed that Brad had been pressuring him to leave his wife and move in together, but had grown angry when David tried to end their romantic relationship that afternoon. He claimed this led to an altercation where Brad brandished a gun. David claimed he acted in self-defense during a struggle, resulting in Brad's death. However, forensic evidence contradicted some of his claims. The detectives quickly discredited David's account of the events, noting its glaring inconsistencies and outright defiance of basic forensic principles. According to David, the fatal shots were accidental, but the evidence told a different story. Brad had been shot twice in the back of the head at close range, a deliberate and calculated act, not an accidental discharge. Ballistics analysis confirmed the trajectory and angle of the shots, indicating the shooter was standing directly behind Brad, contradicting David's claim that the gun went off during a struggle. Additionally, Brad's body showed no defensive wounds or signs of a scuffle, further undermining David's explanation. David also insisted that he had discarded the weapon in a state of panic while fleeing the scene. However, exhaustive searches of the surrounding area by law enforcement and K-9 units failed to locate the gun. Investigators found it suspicious that someone so panicked could effectively dispose of a weapon without leaving a trace. This, combined with his shifting narrative, solidified the detectives' confidence that David was not only lying but had planned the murder. Before formally arresting him, detectives allowed David a monitored conversation with his wife, Sherry. It was a moment fraught with tension, as Sherry sat across from David, her face pale and her hands trembling. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the recording equipment. Sherry demanded answers, her voice quivering as she asked, "Why, David? Why would you do this?" David, visibly distraught but struggling to maintain composure, confessed to having an affair, a revelation that struck Sherry like a physical blow. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," David said, his voice breaking. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, and I can't take it back." Sherry's reaction was one of disbelief and anguish. Tears streamed down her face as she cried, "You made a mistake. You ruined everything. You've destroyed our lives, David." How could you? Her voice rose with every word until it cracked under the weight of her emotion. David, visibly shaken, avoided her gaze and muttered, "I didn't want this to happen. I wish I could change it. I wish I could take it all back." Sherry's expression shifted from sorrow to anger. "Take it back. You can't take back a life, David. Brad is dead, and you did this. I trusted you, I stood by you, and this is how you repay me." She pushed her chair back abruptly, as though she couldn't bear to be near him. "I can't even look at you anymore." Her words seemed to drain the remaining defiance from David. His shoulders slumped, and he stared at the table in silence. For the detectives observing the exchange, Sherry's raw emotions and unequivocal condemnation of David were proof that she had no prior knowledge of the crime. This conversation not only solidified their case against David but also painted a stark picture of the personal devastation his actions had caused. The meeting ended with Sherry storming out of the room, her sobs echoing in the corridor. David was left alone, a broken man whose secrets had unraveled his life and shattered his family. Moments later, the detectives returned to place him under formal arrest, confident that justice would soon be served. The truth about David's crime was far more calculated than he initially let on. Brad, the victim, had been a close friend of the family, trusted by everyone, especially Sherry. His friendship with David spanned decades, making the betrayal even more shocking. But behind the facade of camaraderie, jealousy festered. David had grown suspicious of Brad's intentions toward Sherry, fueled by paranoia and insecurities over his own extramarital affair. Though unfounded, these suspicions drove David to irrational and dangerous conclusions. On the day of the murder, Brad and David had planned to meet at Brad's house for a private time together. According to investigators, David, who was becoming jealous of Brad and his wife talking nicely, seemed like they were having an affair. Brad arrived shortly after, unsuspecting of the trap laid for him. The two men exchanged casual pleasantries before David abruptly shifted the conversation, accusing Brad of inappropriate behavior toward Sherry. Brad, visibly taken aback, denied the accusations and attempted to de-escalate the situation. However, David's tone grew increasingly aggressive, his words laced with venom. According to forensic evidence, it was during this heated exchange that David drew the gun. Brad, shocked, raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, but David was beyond reason. Fueled by rage, jealousy, and a twisted sense of betrayal, David fired the first shot, striking Brad in the back of the head. The force of the impact caused Brad to collapse instantly, but David fired again to ensure there was no chance of survival. David then fled the scene, his mind racing as he tried to piece together an alibi. He discarded the firearm in a river several miles away and returned home, where he feigned ignorance when Sherry asked about his whereabouts. However, David underestimated the forensic capabilities of law enforcement and the resilience of Brad's family, who immediately pushed for answers. Detective Linda Grayson, the lead investigator, quickly pieced together Brad's connections and identified David as a person of interest. Detectives questioned David early in the investigation, noting inconsistencies in his timeline. Surveillance footage from nearby traffic cameras showed David's car along the axis around the time of the murder, directly contradicting his claim that he had been at home. Additionally, phone records revealed a series of deleted messages between David and Brad, hinting at a pre-arranged meeting. When confronted with this evidence, David's facade began to crack. He shifted his story multiple times, initially denying any involvement before claiming self-defense. However, the lack of any defensive wounds on Brad's body, combined with the close-range gunshot wounds to the back of his head, rendered this explanation implausible. As the investigation unfolded, Sherry found herself grappling with conflicting emotions. She couldn't fathom that the man she had shared her life with could commit such a heinous act. Yet, the mounting evidence left her no choice but to confront the reality of David's guilt. The emotional toll on Sherry was immense. Friends and neighbors began to distance themselves, whispers of judgment following her wherever she went. She felt trapped in a nightmare, her once idyllic life shattered beyond repair. When detectives asked her to participate in a recorded conversation with David, she reluctantly agreed, hoping to uncover the truth and perhaps gain closure. David's arrest sent shockwaves through the community. At his trial, the prosecution presented a compelling case, painting him as a man consumed by jealousy and insecurity, willing to destroy anyone who threatened his fragile ego. The defense attempted to argue temporary insanity, citing David's emotional distress over his strained marriage and his misguided belief that Brad posed a threat. Ultimately, the jury saw through the defense's arguments. David was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Sherry, the verdict brought a semblance of closure, but the scars of betrayal and loss would remain with her forever. She sold their family home, unable to bear the memories it held, and moved to a new town to start over. Brad's family, meanwhile, established a scholarship in his memory, ensuring his legacy would endure despite the tragedy of his death. Thank you for listening to True Crime Pulse. Share your thoughts on the story, like and subscribe to the channel. Until next episode when we bring you more crime stories, stay vigilant.